Hello, and welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto, attorney at law in the state of Michigan, where I've been practicing law for 26 years in the fields of consumer protection and lemon law. I often write about the stuff at places like roadandtrack.com, and I've written a few books as well. Today the question is, what's with all the stolen Mustangs? What's with all the stolen Mustangs? And I often ask people who watch the videos or listen to my podcast to send in ideas for stories. And someone sent me a note this past week and said, hey, Steve, there's this great story about this guy who owned a car. Police showed up one day and said, hey, your car is stolen. And he said, you should do a story about that. And so I went and looked up the story. And the funny thing is that when I went to look the story up, I didn't have his email in front of me. So I simply typed in stolen Mustang returned. And I found 3 stories about stolen Mustangs, which is strange. And then I realized I've actually written a story about this for roadandtrack.com. And I've talked about the concept before on this podcast. But I think this spate of stolen Mustangs is an interesting little, if nothing else, statistical anomaly, as we like to say. But here's the deal. I've mentioned before on this show that I had a client years ago who bought a fairly large, expensive SUV. And it was used, and he bought it from a dealership in Michigan. And one day he wakes up to find state police troopers out in his driveway climbing all over this thing. And they came back and said, hey, you bought a stolen vehicle. And they hauled it away. And he never got the car back. So we filed a lawsuit against the dealership for selling a stolen vehicle, and that's a violation of a thing called the breach of the warranty. It's a breach of warranty of title. And so we got him his money back, but it took litigation. But it's an interesting question as to what happens if you woke up one morning and you're innocent. You didn't steal the car. You bought a car in good faith from somebody. What's the situation? So the story that I wrote about for roadandtrack.com about a year ago, I mentioned the fact that there was a story in the news recently, back then, about a guy whose CUDA was stolen back in the early 70s. And after 30 years or so, he found out that the car was in a storage facility someplace, and he'd been sent a letter saying, if you don't come in and pay the storage on your car, we're going to, auction it to sell to raise the money to pay the rent on the locker. Now, he didn't get there in time to recover the car, but he, of course, did some research and found out who had his car. And he contacted the police, and the police said, well, we can't get involved. This is a stolen car, but it's 30 years ago. The crime happened 30 years ago. So they said, we can't get involved. And strangely enough, after a lot of people clamored on the internet that this is insane, that the police won't help recover a stolen car. And somebody pointed out that, by the way, the guy who's got the car is still in possession of stolen property. The police did get involved and the guy got his car back, but only after the guy stripped it. But today we're talking about the stolen Mustangs because, like I said, there's just this unusual thing in the news. If you run the phrase stolen Mustang returned, you'll get at least 3 stories. Okay? And I don't know why this is fascinating to me, but the most recent story is out of Holbrook, New York, where a man says his classic Ford Mustang convertible was taken away by police after they told him it was stolen more than 30 years ago. Stephen Merced bought the 1966 Mustang in 2003 for his daughter's 16th birthday. He says he paid $3,500 for it and then dumped another $60,000 into restoring it. And when the police came and told him the car was stolen, they took it. The car's gone. Now, Merced said he was told the vehicle was stolen in 1980 and that the State Department of Motor Vehicles recently began digitizing VINs from decades-old stolen car reports. And that's how Merced's Mustang popped up in the system and alerted the local police that there was a stolen car in their jurisdiction. Now, it's been 3 months. Merced says police have not told him where the car is or the status of the investigation. In other words, have they given the car back to somebody, or do they still have it, or do they consider it evidence, or what's going on? He says his insurance company wrote him a check for $1,400. You wonder where they got that number from. But he says he's not interested in the money. He just wants his car back. A Suffolk police spokesperson says the Mustang is being held at the West Hampton impound yard and that the investigation is ongoing. Merced said he plans to take legal action if he doesn't get his car back soon. Something's got to be done about this because he said, quote unquote, this is unfair. Now, here's the deal. I got this story off of 12.com's website. I guess that's TV12 there in New York. But the interesting thing is he says, well, this is unfair, okay? And, of course, when you look at it from the viewpoint of the guy who owns the car today and loses it, you go, yeah, it does seem unfair. The guy wakes up one morning, his car is gone. But of course, if you look back at the original owner who owned the car legally, and the car was stolen and then dumped back into the stream of commerce, it's unfair to them too. If the stolen car is, discovered, and they said, "Oh, well, we can't give it back to you because we don't want to hurt the feelings of the guy who's got the car now." Don't get me wrong. I'm saying there's a lot of bad stuff happening here, but we're going to discuss in a moment the legalities of it because that's what I do. I'm an attorney for 26 years. So when I did the search for stolen Mustang returned, not only did that story pop up, but I got one out of the LA Times. Joseph Cerna wrote about this in 2014. So some of these, these aren't all happening right now. It's not like there's an epidemic of this. But I just thought it was funny that these stories all popped up. Linda Allsup was reunited with her Mustang. It's a 1967 Mustang. 28 years after someone stole it from her home in Salinas, California. And the California Highway Patrol, the CHIPS, reunited her with her car. Now, this is an interesting story, and there's a great picture of her posing with the officers who returned the car to her. And they're showing this story from the happy end. That is the woman who gets her car back. And the quote is, "This Mustang is finally galloping home to its rightful owner," the CHP Monterey office said on its Facebook page. Allsup's car was stolen in 1986. She'd had it for 2 years, and she had just bought a customized vanity plate for the car that said Linda 67. And she never got to put it on because someone stole the car first. Now, the car turned up recently at a local DMV when someone tried to register it, and that person was told to take it to a CHP office where the California Highway Patrol traced the Mustang to Allsup's 1986 stolen car report. Monday, Allsup was reunited with the car to which she will happily fasten the Linda 67 license plate to because she's kept it all these years. Meanwhile, authorities are investigating how the Mustang came into the possession of the person who tried to register it with the DMV. And so one of the things that's going on here is in the modern era, VINs on cars, the vehicle identification numbers, appear in a bunch of different places. So it's not uncommon that there's the VIN underneath the window, the windshield that you can see when you're standing outside the door of the driver's side. But this VIN is also stamped places like on the frame and so on. But in the old days, it wasn't as ubiquitous on the car. In fact, I think many cars simply might have just one or two tags. So that's one thing. But also, in the old days, think about this. You buy a 1965 Mustang, you're the original owner, you bought it in 65. Or you bought it in 64 and a half. They didn't have the computerized internet system that they've got now that allows these DMVs to talk to each other. So you walk into a 1964 and a half era DMV and you have what appears to be a title to a car, and you say, "I want to register this car and title it in my name," and they just do a bunch of paperwork and they hand you your stuff and you're on your way. They didn't do a computer check to see if the car had been reported stolen in another state. They didn't have the capabilities back then. So I suspect this is going to be happening more and more as these things go online and these different systems learn to talk with each other. And we all know that the robots are coming for us, so it's just a matter of time. So the third story I found about the stolen Mustang being returned after 38 years, that's the headline by Johnny Lieberman of The Truth About Cars. He tells the story of Judy Smongeski. She finally got back her 1965 Mustang. Now, it has over 300,000 miles on it. And she's rebuilt the engine twice. But the interesting thing is, and I may have misspoken there, because Judy Smongeski is the one who had the car for all those years and all those miles, but it's not her car. Turns out, back in 1970, Eugene Baracki reported the car stolen. And last week, when Smongeski was getting ready to sell the car, the police notified her that her car was, in fact, stolen. She was surprised, as her father had bought her the car when she was a teenager, and he said he bought it off of a used car lot. So, as The Truth About Cars points out, Smongeski had the car almost 10 times as long as Bracky had it, but she's got to give the car back to him. And this is a 6 or 7 year old story now, so we can assume that that's happened. And here's the interesting thing is that the columnist in this Truth About Cars, I think jokingly says, he has the nerve to be angry about the paint job because the car was originally gold and Judy repainted it to a silver blue. And he goes on to note that the ordeal proves conclusively that even though possession is 9/10 of the law, it's not. Well, as a lawyer will tell you, possession is 9/10 of the law is not the law. It's just a saying. A stitch in time saves 9, not the law. Bird in the hand, not the law. Possession 9/10 of the law, not the law. So, what you have going on here, okay, is the question: who owns something? If you have a true owner at the beginning of the chain of title, okay, you have a owner, owner A, capital letter A, like the scarlet letter, okay, and you have owner A has the true ownership of the car. I've got the car, it's titled to me, I own the car, and one day someone comes out in the dead of night and steals my car. Car disappears. I call the police, I report it stolen, and everyone just says, well, it's unfortunate, but your car's gone. We can't find your car's gone. Okay? The person who steals the car, we'll call them the thief, because they are the person who obviously knew it was not their car. They sought to deprive me of my property. They did so illegally and unjustly, so they stole my car. If you take a snapshot in time of the legal rights of the parties to that car at that moment in time, the person who's in possession of the car, 9/10 of the law? I don't think so. The person who's in possession of the car is a thief. They stole the car. The person who owns the car is still me, A. Okay, I'm the owner of the car. You stealing the car does not make it your car. If it did, we'd be living in a very different world than we are right now, okay? So someone steals your car, you still own it. The problem is you just don't have it anymore, okay? So we're making a distinction now between the concepts of ownership and possession. And this is why possession is not 9/10 of the law. Because ownership is always the primary question as to who owns something. I know it's redundant. I'm doing a bootstrap definition here, but the owner owns it. Someone who steals it merely possesses it. And in fact, they possess stolen property, which is a crime in many states. So now you have the thief. And let's say that I think these prototypical transactions go like this. I own the car. My car is stolen by the thief. The thief then turns around and sells the car to a buyer. Let's call that buyer the letter C. We can't call them B because it would go A, thief, B. So we'll go A, thief, C. Work with me. So the thief sells the car to someone else. Okay? So C, the current owner. Hey, that's a good one. The current owner's got the car now. Okay? They think they own it. They might even have a certificate of title, a piece of paper saying they own it. They might own it for 28, 38 years. They might repaint the car and stick $60,000 of improvements in the car somehow. I saw the car with $60,000 worth of improvements. They didn't take, if you know what I mean, but I digress. So there's a person at the end of this chain of title who thinks they own the car. They have no notice the car is stolen somehow. And they've got a document that says certificate of title that lists them as owner. And I have people say, Steve, they got a title. They own the car. That's not how it works. First of all, in most states, there's law that says that a certificate of title is what we call evidence of ownership. But it's not proof. It's not conclusive. So if you go into court and hold up a title and say, I've got the title to this car, I own it, the court will look at you, whether it's a judge or a jury, and say, that's interesting. What else is there on this topic? Okay? And if the previous owner can walk in and say, I actually own the car because I got a title also. Imagine that. Thief didn't steal the title. The thief just stole the car. But they'd say, and I have a police report and evidence that I had the car. It was stolen. And so it then goes back to the current owner who is then asked, okay, prove to us that you've got good title to the car. That's the difference. Having a certificate of title, but having good title, good ownership. And where this all breaks down for the people who are sympathetic to the end owners, the C, the current owners, the people who possess the car, is that in the law, when goods are sold, all goods have titles, believe it or not. It's called a warranty of title. So if I sell you something, I'm telling you I own this thing and I can sell it to you and convey title to you. Now, most items aren't titled with a certificate of title. If I sell you a refrigerator, I don't give you a title for it. If I sell you a lawnmower, it doesn't come with a title, at least not a lower end one. So the point is that I am warranting to you that I own it and that I have the right to sell it to you, and that when I sell it to you, it's going to become yours, unencumbered, as we say, unless, of course, I tell you there's a lien that you got to resolve or something. So What actually happens in these cases is the end owner, C, if they lose the car back to the original owner, okay, and by the way, they're not really losing anything because they didn't own it in the first place. Sad, I guess, but they didn't own it. They have recourse against who they bought it from because that person sold them stolen property. And they breached the warranty of title because the warranty of title says, I'm selling you something I own. And the problem with most of these cases is the breach of warranty of title is a civil action, meaning I got to file a lawsuit over it, and the civil action's got to be brought within a certain number of years, statute of limitations. And quite often, these people are in a position where the statute of limitations is long gone, okay? So these people might not have recourse against the wrongdoer. That's sad, I admit that. But so is auto theft. Someone stealing your car, it's horrible, you know? But the point is that if I own the car, stolen by a thief, and sold to someone else, okay? In my world, I don't feel sorry for the last person who buys a stolen car. I feel sorry for the first person whose car was stolen. That's sad, okay? But second of all, if you're buying a car, an old classic car, okay, one of the things that you need to do is do your homework and look into it. And I've heard stories now of these vehicles that were floating around out there unrecovered because the titles were done incorrectly on purpose. That is, somebody had simply changed one digit of the VIN or something. And so quite often, these stories pop up where someone has a car that was stolen and somebody points out that, hey, your title VIN doesn't match the VIN on your car. So the first thing you need to do is compare the title to the VIN on the car. And if it has a VIN in more than one place, check those. Like in my client's case, there were 2 VIN tags in the car that didn't match somehow, okay? And they didn't match because the car was stolen. So do the research, make sure the VINs match, but also do the research as best you can on searching the title history, finding out who the previous owners were and all that kind of thing. Because if the car's been floating around in the systems for a couple of years, chances are it would have been picked up now by these systems looking for these things. But if somebody sells you a car that's been in a garage for 30 years and they present to you a 31-year-old title, you might want to take a good hard look at that to see if you can determine somehow if, in fact, that car is stolen. Now, the good news is that if you buy the car and it turns out stolen, you can just sue the person you bought it from, breach of warranty of title. And then, of course, they're going to be all upset saying, I thought it was my car. I bought it from this other guy 31 years ago, at which point you have to say, well, go chase him and good luck with that. So that's the spate of stolen Mustangs. Again, I'm sure there's more of them out there. I'm sure there's a lot of non-Mustang stories out there. But I just found it interesting that a bunch of these cars, the 65 Mustang, I believe it was 65, 66, and 67. So, and that again, a statistical anomaly. And that's what's with all the stolen Mustangs. Questions or comments, shoot them my way, lehtoslaw.com, LEHTOSLAW.com. I'm on Twitter, at Steve Lehto, at STEVELEHTO. And this show's on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Podbean, Google Play, and YouTube. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.